This is the Panasonic HC-V180 camcorder. I added this camera to my collection after I lost my Sony CX455 Handycam to supplement the Sony HDR CX405 camera that I modified to add filters in a previous video. See the link to that video in the description. Panasonic camera is very similar to the Sony 405, but with a few additional nice operational functions the 405 didn't have. However, it shared my main objection to the 405 in that there was no direct way to add filters to protect the lens without manually closing the internal lens cover and needing to open it again to capture images with the camera. It was obvious that the Panasonic camera would be much more convenient to use if it had a filter in front of the lens to protect it, but the V180, much like the Sony 405, didn't have any threads to accept conventional filter rings in front of the lens. Note that the Panasonic camera has a smooth bezel on the front of it. It has a hole here where the lens goes, and if you have a lever on the side that allows you to change whether the lens is open or closed, but it's sort of inconvenient to use, and I would prefer to have a filter on there anyway, and maybe some other accessories sometime if I had threads on the front. The closest standard adapter goes from 52mm to 58mm, but the 52mm end was too large to just slip over the end of the camera without a DIY adapter to take up the space between the camera and the standard adapter. So I had to do it yourself type of thing to come up with an adapter. My son found a free do-it-yourself adapter design that was close to what we needed on a 3D printer website. Figured out how to modify it for our camera and got it printed. And this is what it looks like. This side that we're looking at this point was going to have 52mm threads so that I could just thread in a regular 52 to 58mm adapter, and this side was the right size to fit over the bezel of the Panasonic camera. The 3D adapter was supposed to slip over the front of the camera just like this. And out here, around the outer periphery, there would be the 58mm threads. Unfortunately, the 3D approach to the threads wasn't very exact, and the threaded part didn't work as well as I'd hoped it would. However, the threads were close enough that I could take a 52 to 58 adapter and put it on the front like that. It wasn't very smooth, and I didn't trust the threads to hold it, but just for presentation purposes you can see how this was supposed to go, and I'll talk about how I actually accomplished it further on. And that meant that I could put a 58mm UV lens over the commercial adapter once I figured out how to attach the adapter to my do-it-yourself adapter. So I could actually purchase the same type of things that I used on the Sony camera in some ways, because I could certainly get the UV filter with 58mm threads. I can buy the adapter that has the 52mm threads that didn't work out exactly the way I hoped, and the 58mm threads on the other side. And the key to this whole thing is this little do-it-yourself 3D adapter that we had made. I started out to turn one of these on my lathe. I'm not a great machinist, but I can do rough things that have to be close, and I can make up for the difference with epoxy. But I couldn't really make something this neat on the lathe. And there's also another feature here that I need to talk about. You see this flat place right here? That's kind of important. It's not the kind of thing I can do in a lathe, but I can certainly do it with a file later on. This little flat piece right here, I'll talk about that more in a minute. That's the only thing that makes this really special, except for the fact that it's black and it's kind of neat, and it fits everything that it needs to fit, pretty much. In order to demonstrate the uniqueness of the do-it-yourself adapter that we had made with the 3D printer, I've turned the viewer so it's completely horizontal, as if you were standing above the camera taking something that was parallel to the Earth's surface. If you don't ever need to do that, then this next feature may not be important to you, but it was to me. So we designed a notch in the edge of the do-it-yourself adapter such that the curvature of the adapter comes around to here, and then it breaks off straight down from there, so that you can actually rotate this without hitting the adapter. Otherwise you would be limited to right about there, and that's probably good enough for most people. But occasionally I've needed to take pictures, or thought I needed to take pictures of something that was right on the ground, and I don't have to lay on the ground and look through the viewfinder with it in this position. And I can stand above it, kneel above it, whatever my old bones like for me to do, and turn this down to the point where I can read what I'm looking at and not have to get down on the ground to do it. So that was kind of a neat thing. It wasn't difficult to do. The 3D printer had no problem with it once my son modified the code that was being used for it. So it just so this curve just comes around to here like this, gets down to here, and then it goes flat so that you can clear the viewfinder. Now, there's no way to adjust the viewfinder. You can't move it out further, so the only choice I had was to cut away a little bit from the adapter. From the beginning, I knew that epoxy was going to figure into whatever I had to do with an adapter, whether I made the adapter on my lathe or whether I had found some way to have one made. If I made one on my lathe, it wasn't going to have the right threads in it anyway, because I could never thread something that intricate on my lathe. So it was good that the 3D printer was able to make this thing and come up with a pretty good approximation to the threads. Not so much for it to thread into something, but given a surface that I could epoxy readily to. So the next step here, I'm going to have to stop here and get some epoxy mixed up. Next step is to take this piece like this and epoxy it. Help to turn around the right way and epoxy it to that, so that I have a piece like this, so that I have a piece like this when I'm done that has 58mm threads, 58mm threads on this side, and that I can epoxy the camera on this side. So my plan is to put a thin coat of epoxy right here on these threads that the 3D printer put in the adapter. I want to avoid getting the epoxy all over the outside and everything, but I think this will work pretty well. And I'll spread a thin coat of epoxy around the inside of this, just enough to do the job, hopefully. And then I'll take this and I'll use the existing threads that are in the adapter, such as they are, to help me line this up and screw it down tight, and then I'll just let it sit. This is what the finished product looks like. Notice I put a lens cover, a regular lens cover on the front here, now that I have adapters that I can do that with. And the way it's attached, get a little bit of focus going on here. This is the way it all went together. This is one of 4 blobs of epoxy that was used to hold the 3D adapter to the camera, and then there's this section here, which is the adapter that I bought to screw in to the 3D adapter. It's epoxied internally, and then the UV filter screws on the outside, and along with whatever else you want to put onto it. When I discussed the notch in the do-it-yourself adapter that we had made in 3D, I didn't mention the implications of doing selfies. I don't do selfies. I indicated that if you wanted to set your camera down on the ground and not have to lay down there with it to take a ground level picture, you could turn your viewfinder in that direction, and you see this is the little notch part right here that allows that to do that. That's also important if you were going to do a selfie, because then you have to go the rest of the way, and then you would be hitting that same area if it didn't have the notch in it. So that may be important to you. It wasn't important to me at the time, but taking ground level pictures was, because I don't kneel down and lay on the ground as easy as I did when I was younger.